The toasts had just begun when my sister raised her glass. Amelia. Even her name seemed to shimmer, just like the beaded champagne-colored gown she wore, a masterpiece of understated elegance that likely cost more than my mortgage payment. The crystal flute in her hand caught the light from the chandeliers, scattering tiny rainbows across the linen tablecloths of the overly opulent reception hall. A hush fell, the kind of anticipatory silence Amelia always commanded, effortlessly. My own daughter, Lily, sat a few seats down at our table, a still point in the swirling joy of the room. I saw her from the corner of my eye, her gaze fixed on her aunt, her young face, too young for the burdens I sometimes felt I'd inadvertently placed on her, unreadable. Amelia's voice, when she spoke, was honey-sweet, laced with that familiar, sharp edge, like a beautiful, perfectly honed blade. "To my dear sister, Sarah," she began, turning towards me, a brilliant smile curving her lips, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Always the dreamer. A soft, indulgent chuckle rippled through the guests. "Remember that little bakery you tried to start in your 20s, darling? The one with the creative sourdough?" The room filled with polite, then slightly more robust, laughter. It wasn't outright mockery, not to an outsider. It was framed as a fond, teasing reminiscence. But I felt the heat crawl up my neck, the familiar tightening in my chest. That little bakery had been my heart and soul for 3 agonizing years, built on second-hand equipment in a tiny, rented storefront, fueled by hope and flour dust. Its failure had been a quiet devastation, one Amelia had witnessed with a kind of pity that felt sharper than scorn. To hear it brought up now, in this glittering assembly, reduced to an amusing anecdote, was like having an old wound prodded with a jeweled finger. I managed a small, tight smile, my own champagne flute a fragile shield. I could feel Lily's eyes on me, a silent question. I tried to telegraph reassurance, a calm I didn't feel. "Breathe, Sarah, just breathe. It's Amelia. It's what she does." Years of practice had taught me to swallow the hurt, to smooth the creases from my expression, to maintain the carefully constructed peace of our family. My parents, beaming at Amelia from the head table, wouldn't understand a disruption. They only ever saw her shine, her triumphs. My small, quiet struggles were often invisible, or perhaps simply less interesting. The memory of that bakery surfaced, unbidden. The scent of yeast and scorched sugar, the chill of pre-dawn mornings, my hands chapped and aching. I remembered the day I'd finally turned the key in the lock for the last time, the little bell above the door giving a mournful jingle. Amelia had found me there, amidst the packed boxes and the ghosts of my ambitions. She'd put a hand on my shoulder, her touch light, almost dismissive. "Oh, Sarah," she'd said, her voice soft. "Perhaps some things just aren't meant to be. You always did aim a little, unconventionally." There was no malice in her tone, just a statement of what, to her, was obvious fact. And that, somehow, had hurt more. I brought myself back to the present, to the clinking of glasses and the murmur of approval for Amelia's wit. She was continuing, her voice weaving a narrative where she was the pragmatic, successful one, and I, the well-meaning but slightly hapless younger sister. It was an old script, one she'd been refining since we were children. I remembered a school talent show. I was 8, terrified but determined to sing a song I'd practiced for weeks, my small voice trembling but true. Amelia, already poised and confident at 10, had gone on before me, performing a flawless ballet routine that had the audience on their feet. When my turn came, the applause for her was still echoing. I sang my little song, my heart pounding, and received polite, scattered claps. Afterward, Amelia had hugged me, her smile bright. "You were so brave, Sarah," she'd said. "Even if your voice did shake a bit." The praise felt like a consolation prize, her own brilliance dimming my small effort. It wasn't that she was overtly cruel. It was more insidious than that. A subtle repositioning of facts, a gentle emphasis that always left her in the more favorable light. Like the time I'd won a local art competition, a small, deeply personal achievement. At the next family gathering, Amelia had somehow managed to turn the conversation to her recent promotion, her story so dazzling, so full of impressive names and responsibilities, that my little art prize was forgotten. A faded watercolor next to her vibrant oil painting. I'd learned to dim my own light to avoid the comparison, because the contrast always felt too stark, too painful. Now, at her wedding, standing in the glow of her expensive happiness, she was doing it again. But she has a good heart, Amelia conceded, her gaze sweeping over me with a magnanimity that felt suffocating. And she raised a wonderful daughter, didn't you, Lily? She gestured towards Lily, pulling her into the narrative. Lily offered a small, polite smile, her eyes flicking towards me for a fraction of a second. I saw the discomfort there, the subtle clenching of her jaw. She was gripping her linen napkin tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. My protective instincts surged, a fierce, silent ache. I wanted to shield her from this, from the complicated, unspoken tensions that ran like a dark current beneath the surface of our family gatherings. Amelia was winding down her toast, oblivious or perhaps perfectly aware of the undercurrents. She raised her glass higher. So, to Sarah, for always reminding us that, well, that not everyone can be a star, but the audience is important too. More laughter, louder this time. It washed over me, cold and sharp. I felt myself shrink further, my smile pasted on, my gaze dropping to the intricate pattern of the lace on the tablecloth. The tiny, embroidered flowers blurred. I was back in my small apartment, the one Lily and I had shared after my divorce, the paint peeling slightly in the kitchen, the mismatched furniture a testament to making do. I remembered sewing Lily's school play costumes late into the night, the hum of the old machine a comforting sound in the quiet. I remembered the scraped knees I'd kissed better, the bedtime stories whispered in the dark, the small, everyday acts of love and perseverance that made up our life. None of it felt like material for a sparkling wedding toast. It was just life. My life. Quiet, perhaps, but not without its own value. My gaze drifted back to Lily. Her head was slightly bowed, her dark hair falling forward, obscuring her expression. And then I saw her cousin, Amelia's daughter, Clara, who was seated beside her. Clara was about 15, a sensitive, thoughtful girl I'd always felt a quiet affinity for. Her usually bright face was clouded. Her eyes, wide and troubled, darted from her mother, to me, and then to Lily. Her hand, holding her own napkin, was twisting it, a small, distressed motion. A fresh wave of shame washed over me. Had I been so focused on my own discomfort that I'd failed to see how this affected the children? Lily, stoic and observant. Clara, empathetic and now visibly distressed. Amelia was accepting the applause, her smile radiant. She sat down, leaning towards her new husband, sharing a private, happy murmur. The master of ceremonies was preparing to introduce the next speaker. And then, a small sound. A chair scraping slightly against the polished floor. My head snapped up. Clara was standing. Her napkin was still clutched in her hand, now a crumpled ball of white linen. Her face was pale, her eyes huge. For a moment, she just stood there, swaying slightly, as if the act of rising had taken all her courage. A hush fell over the nearby tables, a ripple of curiosity spreading through the room. Amelia turned, a flicker of surprise, then mild annoyance, in her expression. "Clara, honey? What is it?" Her voice was indulgent, as if to a child who had chosen an inopportune moment to ask for something. Clara swallowed, her gaze fixed not on her mother, but on me. Her voice, when it came, was soft, trembling at first, but with an undertone of fierce conviction. I wanted to say something too. The master of ceremonies paused, microphone in hand. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even the servers, discreetly refilling water glasses, froze. "Mom," Clara began, her voice gaining a little strength, though her hands were shaking. She turned slightly to face Amelia. You always talk about winning, about being the best, about how important it is to shine." Her eyes flickered to me, a quick, almost desperate glance, then back to her mother. "And you do shine, Mom. You're amazing at being bright." Amelia's smile was a little strained now. "Well, thank you, sweetie. That's nice." She clearly wanted her daughter to sit down. But Clara wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, her small shoulders squaring. "But, Aunt Sarah." She paused, and her eyes met mine directly, a profound, steady gaze that seemed to bypass all the noise, all the history, all the unspoken hurts. "Aunt Sarah taught me something different." The silence in the room was absolute. Forks were literally suspended in midair. Smiles had vanished, replaced by expressions of stunned bewilderment. I could feel my own heart pounding, a frantic bird against my ribs. What was she doing? "Aunt Sarah taught me about getting back up," Clara continued, her voice clearer now, resonating with a sincerity that was utterly disarming. "I remember when her little shop, the bakery Mom mentioned, when it didn't work out." My breath caught in my throat. "Oh, Clara, no, don't." I was little, but I remember visiting her afterwards. She wasn't crying, not in front of me anyway. She was quiet. And then she showed me how she was learning to fix the leaky faucet in her kitchen by herself, watching a video on her old computer. She said, "Sometimes things break, Clara. You just have to figure out how to mend them or build something new." A memory, sharp and vivid. Clara, about 8 years old, perched on a stool in my tiny kitchen, watching me wrestle with a wrench and a corroded pipe, water dripping steadily into a bucket. I'd been feeling so low that day, the failure of the bakery a heavy cloak around my shoulders. But her small, curious presence had been a balm. I tried to explain, in simple terms, that sometimes plans change, and you have to adapt. I hadn't realized she'd held on to that. Clara's gaze swept the room, a fleeting, brave glance, before returning to me. And she taught me about kindness. The real kind. Not the kind that's loud and wants everyone to see it. Her eyes flicked to Amelia again, just for a second, but the implication hung in the air, palpable. When my cat, Whiskers, got sick and Mom was busy with work, Aunt Sarah came over every day after her own job. She helped me give him his medicine. She sat with me when he didn't make it. She didn't say much. She just held my hand. And she brought over a tiny plant, a little violet, and said, "Life finds a way to keep growing, even when it's hard." Tears pricked at my eyes. I remembered that sad, rainy week. Clara had been heartbroken. Amelia, stressed with a major project, had been sympathetic but distracted. I'd simply done what felt natural, offering comfort, a quiet presence. I hadn't thought of it as a lesson or anything remarkable. "She always has time," Clara went on, her voice gaining a surprising power, a youthful clarity that cut through the sophisticated veneer of the reception. "Even when she's tired." When Lily was little and Aunt Sarah was working 2 jobs, I'd sometimes go over after school. Their apartment wasn't big or fancy like ours, but it was warm. There were always books and the smell of something baking, even if it was just simple cookies. She'd help me with my homework, and she'd listen, really listen, when I talked about things. She never made me feel like my worries were silly or small. I saw Lily then, truly saw her. Her head was up, and she was looking at Clara with an expression of such profound, quiet pride that it made my own throat ache. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Lily's lips. Amelia was rigid, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. The bright, confident smile was gone, replaced by a tight, controlled neutrality that I recognized as a precursor to her displeasure. Her new husband looked deeply uncomfortable, staring at his plate. My parents looked utterly bewildered. So, when I think about what kind of person I want to be, Clara concluded, her voice ringing with a conviction that belied her years, I think about Aunt Sarah. I think about how she's always there, quietly making things better, helping people, even when no one is watching or giving her an award for it. That's a different kind of shining, I think. And maybe, her voice dropped a little, but every person in that room heard her. Maybe it's the kind that matters more. She raised her crumpled napkin as if it were a champagne flute. So, I'd like to make a toast to my Aunt Sarah for showing me what real strength and real kindness look like. Thank you, Aunt Sarah. She looked directly at me then, her eyes shining, not with tears of sadness, but with a fierce, loving loyalty. And in that moment, all the years of feeling small, of being subtly undermined, of swallowing my hurt, seemed to recede. I couldn't speak. I could only look back at this incredible girl, my niece, who had, with a few simple, honest words, given me a gift more precious than any jewel. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't stunned anymore. It was thoughtful, respectful. People slowly lowered their forks. A few guests exchanged quiet, almost odd glances. No one clapped, not immediately. It wasn't that kind of speech. It was too raw, too real. Then, slowly, one person, an elderly woman I didn't know, raised her glass towards me with a soft smile. Then another, and another. Not a toast to spectacle, but a quiet acknowledgement. Amelia remained still, her expression unreadable now, her earlier radiance completely extinguished. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Clara. She stared straight ahead, as if suddenly finding the floral centerpiece immensely fascinating. Across the room, my eyes met Clara's. A small, almost shy smile touched her lips. I offered one in return, a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes, now shimmering with unshed tears. No words were needed. In her courageous honesty, she had not only defended me, but had defined a legacy of quiet perseverance I hadn't even realized I was creating. She had seen me, truly seen me, when I had long thought I was invisible. The toasts had just begun when my sister raised her glass, but she wasn't the one we remembered. In the end, it was the quiet voice of a brave young girl, speaking her truth, that truly resonated, shifting the light in the room, illuminating a different kind of strength, a different kind of sparkle. One that had nothing to do with expensive gowns or witty barbs, and everything to do with the enduring power of a kind and steadfast heart.